Hello and welcome back to this series. In this video, we will finish the input summary sheet that we created last time and that you can see right here. And we will do this using some formulas. Now, before we start, let's have a look on how exactly we are going to do this. So this is what we just saw. We have that input summary sheet with the row names, which is basically a list of all the countries we have statistics for without any duplicates. And we have that column names, which are basically the statistics, so like views, watch time in minutes, and so on in each of the columns we have. So what we want to do today is we want to retrieve results. And we want to do this with one single formula. This formula must be able to do three things. The first thing is we want to be able to identify the country name in that input summary sheet and find that name in one of the input sheets. Now I'll come back to that input sheet and which input sheet that should be in a few seconds. As a second step, we want to be able to identify the column names. So we want to define which statistic should be retrieved from the input sheet. And the third thing, and now I'm coming to that input sheet that we want to retrieve the data from, we want to create a sheet reference in an input cell. So this means we want to be able to have a cell in which we can write the sheet reference so that the formula knows it should look for the country and the statistic in the sheet that we want. In that case, that would be the January to June 2016 sheet, so the first period. As soon as we finish that formula and that first table, we will copy down that table 2 times. So because we have 3 periods, we need 3 tables. Of course, in these tables, the period would be wrong, so the sheet reference. This means the last step will be to change that sheet reference and the period to the correct periods. Now this is a lot of work, but as you can see, this will be a bigger formula, but as you will see, we will create that formula step by step, so it's quite easy in the end actually. Now, time to start and time to see how this works. Now back in Excel and back where we stopped last time, let me first write a direct link to the first input sheet to see what result we want to retrieve and to check if we will build the correct formula in the next minutes. So I'm in cell C2 and write equals, go to the first input sheet and also to cell C2. Now this 463282, this is the value we want to have with another formula now. Now I'll just cut that by pressing Ctrl X and pasting the value right here. We will delete that later, it's just for us to see if we built the formula correctly. And now I'll go back to cell C2. Now remember what we just talked about a few minutes ago. We want a formula which can do 3 things. Let's start with the first thing, or the first 2 things actually. We want to be able to find the country and the statistic in the first input sheet. To do this, we will use the index match formula. Now, what is the index match formula? The index match formula is a combined formula. It's a combination of an index formula and a match formula, obviously. So the index part, so the first part of that formula, retrieves the result, so that value in the end that we want to have. The match part is responsible to identify the country in our case. So it will find the United States in the input sheet. And as soon as it found the United States, it can find the corresponding statistic with that index part. Now, while I'm telling you that, you see that this is kind of the wrong way, at least in my opinion, to be honest, because it would make more sense to me to start with the match part, so to tell the formula what it should look for, and then to write the index part, so the part that retrieves the value. This is why I will start with the match part right now. And as soon as we finish the match formula, I will put the index formula in front of the match formula. So that in the end, it's an index match formula, but we start with the match because it's more intuitive. That's at least what I think. Maybe you share this opinion. Now, after telling you that, let's write that formula. So I'm in cell C2 still, typing equals match. Well, I'm not writing match, I'm writing MA. And you can see that a menu or a little table opens. This is a good function of Excel because if you now use the arrow keys on the keyboard, like down or up, you can select the formula you want. In our case, we want the match formula, so we could now write MATCH, or we could simply click that formula, or, and that's what I always do, simply press Tab on the keyboard. As you can see, Excel automatically completes the formula and opens the first bracket for you. And if you have to write a lot of formulas, this is really a great help. A little help, but a good help. As we now have that match formula, it's time to define the lookup value, as we can see right here actually. The lookup value in our case is either the country name or the country ID. As both columns are unique, so we have each country and the corresponding country ID only once, we can decide what we want. So I will use the country ID because it's shorter. As soon as we got the country ID, we have to write a comma or a semicolon. This depends on your Excel settings. So in my case, it's a comma. Now we have to define the lookup array. The lookup array is basically the area where Excel should look for this country ID. We will start with the first input sheet, so the first period, and the column B, which is also the country ID. So what we're doing right here is we tell Excel, find US in the January to June 2016 sheet. That's everything for the moment. And I can select the entire column because, again, we only have unique values in that column. So if you would have duplicates in here, this wouldn't work because Excel would simply match the first country ID it finds. So if US is in the second row and in the fifth row, you will have wrong results in the end. So be careful about that. In our case, this is possible because we have that unique values in column B, so it's fine. Another comma. Now we simply have to define the match type. In our case, it's simply an exact match because we really want to find US and nothing close to that. Let's close the bracket. And now we have to write the index formula. And as I said, the formula is called index match. So we have to write index in front of the match part. So I'm simply clicking right here, writing IND, and again pressing tab to start the formula. Now the only thing we have to do, not the only thing, let's first click and hold the left mouse button to drag that box to the right to see what we actually want to select. And here I will now select column C, because you can see that we now identified the area the results should be retrieved from. In our case, this is the watch time in minutes because that's the first statistic that we want. Now, we will change that soon, don't worry, but for the moment, this is how we can do that. Now we write another comma and press enter 2 times, so 1 time, and a second time to let Excel automatically complete the brackets, which is a nice little help. So I'm pressing enter again, and as we can see, we have the same value as with the direct link we put here into that cell before. Now, this is nice, right? We can now dynamically retrieve the data, and if we copy that formula down or to the right, it would get those data as we wanted. But is that already what we want to have? Remember the 3 things we want to have. We want to be able to identify the country and to define the column and to define the sheet reference. We got the country. The column is still inside that formula, so we cannot define anything. And the sheet reference is also inside that formula. So we are not there yet. So we have to add something else. And before we add that formula, let's add a row and a column. Because in the row, we will write that column reference in the end. And into the column, right here, we will write that sheet reference. Now, let's just do that so that you can see what we want to do here. So I'm clicking into the first column, and now I'm pressing Ctrl+. This simply enters a new column. And we can do the same thing in the first row by selecting the first row and pressing Ctrl+ again. Now, as we got that, we have to think about another formula. Or not another formula, an additional formula actually. Because the thing we have right here, this is good. It's just not complete. So as we want to be able to refer to other cells, which include the real references, so the sheet name and the column reference, we can use an indirect formula. Because the indirect formula simply can do that. It allows us to refer to sheets or cells in other cells as long as those cells you refer to include those sheet names or column references. Now, this sounds a little bit complicated maybe, but let's just write that indirect formula step by step, and then you will see again, this is actually not that difficult. So let's do this. So the index part is fine. We need to start changing the formula after the first bracket. And the first thing you will see is that there is that single quotation mark. We will come back to that in a few seconds. Let me first write that indirect formula, so IND. So we can now press the down arrow key and press tab. Now we already got the indirect formula, or at least the beginning of the formula, to be honest. And now we have the single quotation mark I just talked about. Why is this here? Well, if you look at the sheet reference we have, you see that this sheet name includes non-alphabetical values, so these little dashes basically. The same thing would happen if this sheet name would include spaces. As soon as something like this happens, so non-alphabetical values or spaces, Excel automatically writes those single quotation marks. That's just how it is actually, and it's not a problem. The only thing you have to know right here is that you have to include those single quotation marks in your indirect formula. And you can simply do that by framing those single quotation marks with normal quotation marks, like this and like that. Now this is the first part of the formula, so that single quotation mark. Now we can combine that with our sheet reference by writing AND. This AND is, by the way, also great if you want to combine two cells, for instance, in Excel, but that's just a side note actually. So now we have that AND and we have that sheet reference in the formula. Let's just select that sheet reference and press Ctrl X to cut that out so that we can paste it in a few seconds. And now change that reference we had before, so that, or that name actually that was in the formula, to a cell reference. And this should be cell A3. So in cell A3, we will copy or we will paste the name we just cut out in a few seconds. Now this is the first part. Now we have a dynamic cell which allows us to refer to the sheet that we want to. Let's just complete that by writing another AND. Now you see another single quotation mark. You just learned what that is. And we have an exclamation mark. The exclamation mark is simply the combination of the sheet name and the cell reference in Excel. This is also something set automatically. So the only thing you have to know right now is that you have to keep that. And how do we keep those things? Well, we again frame them with a normal quotation mark or with two normal quotation marks. So first one and second one. So now the sheet reference and this connection between the sheet name and the cell is complete. We can now write another AND to combine that. And now you see a problem. No, not a problem actually, but something that's not really reasonable. Because indirect now expects a cell reference in the entire column C. And this obviously doesn't make a lot of sense. So what we should do right here is we should delete that C, so that column C reference, and refer to cell D1 right here. Let me just drag that to the right so that you can see that. Right here. Now, in this cell, we will write CC in a few seconds. It's the same logic we just had with the sheet name, just with the cell right now. This is how indirect works actually, and you will see that this is really great. So let's finish that formula by writing the second bracket. Now this looks correct, so we can now press enter and we get a ref error. Now if you followed that formula, you probably know why this is happening. We have to add the sheet name and the cell reference, of course. So let's go to cell A3, press Ctrl V and enter to paste the sheet name and increase the column width with a double click right here. Now we have still a ref error, but we simply have to correct that with the cell reference. So this was CC. And now we see that we have the same value as with the direct link. So we made a great progress, right? Now we can define the sheet name and the column reference. So if we change CC to DD, for instance, then it will retrieve the views. Now, we don't want that here, of course, but it just allows us to do that more dynamically, and this is what we want. Now, let's first complete that formula, because the index part is fine, but the match part still contains that sheet reference. And after we did that, let's have another look at the formula. So I will select the indirect part we just wrote, because this is still correct, and copy it until the third AND. So Ctrl Z, now we select that part right here. You see how far I selected the formula, because that BB, well, we have to have a look at that. And press Ctrl V to paste that indirect part. And now you see the same thing we had in the index part. Indirect now expects a cell reference in column B. Again, this doesn't make a lot of sense, but there is a difference when comparing it to the index part. In the index part, we made that dynamic reference because we know that the columns to retrieve the statistics from might change depending on the statistic you want to have. In that case, we always want to refer to the same column, so the country ID. This is the country name here, by the way, because we inserted that column to the left, so no worries about that. We still want to find the country ID, as you can see right here, in column B in one of the input sheets. So what we can do right here is we can simply write this BB in quotation marks, and this means that indirect will now look for the country ID, so this part right here, in column B of the corresponding sheet that we define. And this is exactly what we want to have. So this means that our indirect formula is now almost complete. We need to make the bracket, of course. Now press enter. And we see that it works perfectly. And to show you how perfectly this works, let's simply change that part, so the sheet reference, to the July to December reference, for instance, and see if it retrieves the right value. So I'm writing July till December 16. Now let's see what happens. Oh, sorry for scrolling down. Now we have that 979941. Let's remember that. 979941. So this is how it works. And to be honest, I really like that because this is now a really dynamic way on how we can retrieve the data. And yeah, that's why I like it. We can now change that back to the January to June 2016 data. So we got that. And now let's have a look at that index indirect formula that we created. One thing I'm not liking at the moment is that if we copy that formula down right now, and there are other issues, I'll come to those issues in a few minutes. And if we copy that formula down now, then we have countries in that list for which we don't have data for in the first period. Because you remember, this is a list of all the countries we have data for in either one or all of the periods we consider. So if we copy it down, we would get an error. And this is not nice, so we should change that. Because if we just assume that if this country is not in the list, there should be a 0, right? Because if it's not in the list, then there is 0 views, 0 likes, and so on. So what I want to do is, if this formula results in an error, I want this formula to return a 0. And actually, I just said the formula. We will write an if-error formula. This formula will exactly do what I just said. So if this results in an error, it will return 0. Let's see how we can write that. So I'll write if-error in front of the current formula we created. Go down, press tab. Now this is the value. So the whole index indirect match formula. Go to the end of the formula, press comma, and now define the value that should be retrieved if we have an error here, and this is simply 0. So I'm pressing enter again. Well, sorry, I didn't close the bracket, as you can see here in the end, so let's do that. Now it's fine. Of course, nothing changed right here because we have data for the United States, but you will see when we copy the formula down in a few minutes, then we have some zeros. So let's now go through the formula and see if we have to fix any references. Now, this simply means if we press F2 now to jump into the formula, we see that if we copy that formula down, for instance, then the reference for A3, so the sheet name, would change. And this means the formula would not work anymore. Let's just try that. So if I press Shift and the down arrow key and Control D, then we have 0. Yes, because we wrote that if error. But in this case, this if error is wrong because we have data for that. And so we have to fix that reference. And we have to fix the row reference for our cell reference. Lots of references here at the moment. So let's go back and see how we have to change that. So I'm pressing F2 again. And then we go to A3. A3 should not change at all. If we copy down or to the right, it should always refer to cell A3. Now let's press F4 once. And if you look at the reference now, you see that we have those dollar signs in front of the column reference, so the A, and in front of the row reference, so the 3. Now, this means that neither the row nor the column will change if we copy the formula to the left, to the top, to the right, to the bottom. So this is what we want to have. Let's do the same thing for the second A3 right here. So I'm selecting it and press F4. And now the sheet reference is fine. Let's now have a look at the references for the country ID, so in the match part. And here we can see that the formula should be able to go down. So if we copy the formula down, it should select the next country, but it should not move to the right. So if we copy the formula to the right to retrieve other statistics, it should remain in column C. This means I'm pressing F4 once, twice, and a third time, because now the column is fixed. This is also good. Let's now have a look at the cell reference finally, and this is right here. Again, I will put that to that area. And now we see that here we have, well, it's like the other way around. We had it just for the country ID. We want to fix the row, because if we copy the formula down, it should remain right here. But if we copy to the right, it should move to the next column. So I'm pressing F4 once, twice. Now this looks fine. So let's press enter. And we see that nothing changed. But things will change now, because now we can finally copy that formula down and complete the first table. Let's do that. So I press and hold the Shift key, press the down arrow key, and scroll down to the last country we have in our list. This should be right here. Now I keep Shift pressed and go to the right. I think it was column I, right? I'm not sure now. We will see in a few seconds. Now I stop pressing Shift and press Ctrl D to copy the formula down and Ctrl R to copy the formula to the right. And now we see that we have lots of zeros in here, but this makes sense because, well, we didn't complete the cell reference up here. So let's do that quickly. So this is E, F, G, again, sorry, and H. Now this is fine, and now we completed our first table. We now retrieve the data totally dynamic with that great formula we built. The only problem we have is that if we copy that table down now, the references would be wrong. Because what we just fixed, like for instance the sheet reference, is totally fine for that structure we just created. But if you copy that whole structure down, then the sheet reference has to change. And so jump down to the next table so that we are able to define another period for that sheet reference. As this is not working at the moment, we have to go into the formulas one last time to change that. Now let's do that, and let's first delete that little helper we had because we don't need it anymore. So let's select all the formulas. So I'm pressing Shift, Control and the right arrow key and the down arrow key. And now comes Ctrl H, which is the find and replace function. And this is really what we need right here, because we want to find $A, $3, and I'm writing that because if we would just write something like A, then it would also change the A in match, for instance, so we don't want that. And we want to replace this $A, $3 thing with $A3. Because this means that the column is still fixed, which is fine, so not a problem with that, but the row is dynamic or can change, and this is what we want. So let's press Replace All. Now we see that Excel replaced all of the values, and we see that the formula still seems to work, so this is fine. And now we have to do the same thing for the country name, because this is not fixed, and it's not the same thing as I just saw, it's the other way around. So we unfixed A3 and we have to fix the row for that reference, because same logic. The list we have right here is a unique list or a list we created. So this reference is not allowed to change, because if this changes, then the country list is wrong. Also something we don't want. So let's press Shift, Control and the down arrow key and press Ctrl H. And now we don't want to replace A3. We want to replace !A. Again, why am I writing !A here? If we don't write that, then we would replace that A in January. Not good, because then the formula doesn't work anymore. So this is why you can always change things like that easily by including that !, for instance. Now we want to replace that !A with !A and a $sign, because then we will fix the row. And that's what we want. So I'm pressing Replace All now, and we see that Excel made 216 replacements. So this is the amount of countries we have. And as this is a link to the input sheets, we can now simply press and hold Shift, press the right arrow key, and press Ctrl R. And now we also copied that fixed row to the column IDs, to the country IDs. So let's go back to here. And now it's finally time to copy down that table 2 times. You remember in the beginning, that's what we actually wanted to do. So I'm now selecting cell I3, press Shift, Ctrl and the down key, press Shift, Ctrl, or keep it pressed actually, the left arrow key, Ctrl Z. Now I will select cell A219 because it should be a list without any blank rows. Press Ctrl V, scroll down to the end of that table, select A435, press Ctrl V. Now we got that. And now let's see if it works still. So I'm selecting the sheet reference of the third table, so the last period, which is January to February 17. And we see that the values changed. Now let's see if this is the correct one. Let's select Canada, for instance, so 42048. Canada 42048 and 96 subscribers. Let's see if that's also correct. Yes, so this seems to work. Really great. Now I'm selecting A435, press and hold Ctrl and press the up arrow key to change the reference of the second table. And this is July to December 16. This also seems to work. We can check that quickly. India 2676, for instance. Let's see, 2676 subscribers. Really great. So this is it, right? Now we finished our input summary sheet and we created that dynamic combined formula. Now this is really great because we can now build our analysis part, and we will do that in the next video. So thanks for watching and see you then. Bye bye.